This is 5 Live Formula One with Jenny Gow.
Good morning. Who's up? Who's ready for this? It's free practice 3 and we've got qualifying later today ahead of the Australian Grand Prix from Melbourne, Albert Park. Another glorious day. Track temperature 32 degrees, air temperature 24 degrees. Not quite like that in the UK right now, but don't worry, we will warm things up. Plenty to talk about as well, with lots going on overnight. And let me introduce our commentary team to you first and foremost. We have Harry Benjamin. And Harry, it was a good day for the red team yesterday, wasn't it?
It really was. Both drivers topping FP1 and FP2. Sainz in FP1, Leclerc in FP2, but right now it's still too close to call, I think, between the Red Bull cars and Ferrari as well. It's going to be another fight this weekend.
Certainly will be. Mark Priestley is alongside you. And Mark, a couple of changes, well, one change specifically with the track overnight for safety reasons.
Yeah, that's right. There was a lot of talk coming into this weekend about the fact that there are 4 DRS zones. We haven't had that before in Formula One, and it is no more. We're back down to 3 DRS zones, with the sector round the back, the very fast sweeping sector between turns 9 and 10, having that DRS zone removed. So that's the major change. It's been done on safety grounds. Very, very high-speed section now. So we'll see how that plays out as the weekend goes on.
And of course, Andrew Benson is also here, the BBC's chief F1 writer. And Andrew, Toto Wolff's been talking to the press, as he normally does, I suppose, about the woes that Mercedes face. Yesterday, 11th and 13th, it was another poor day for them. What's he been saying, and is there any hope for Mercedes fans?
Well, Mercedes basically need to find some development. Mercedes basically need to find some development for that car, Jenny, don't they? That's the core issue. Now, I don't think we should be too distracted by 11th and 13th places on the practice times yesterday. When you look at the long runs, they were kind of where you'd expect them to be, sort of a long way off Red Bull and Ferrari, but sort of at the head of the midfield. So we'll see how they get on today. But they were suffering very badly through yesterday with this porpoising problem that's been affecting them since this car hit the track in pre-season testing, and that's a sort of high-frequency bouncing down the straights above a certain speed. It's created by aerodynamic reasons under the car, and that's stopping them running where they want the car to run. But Ferrari also had porpoising yesterday, and they're quickest. So it's not just that, it's a sort of combination of things, and their sort of active question at the moment is the car good enough? Ultimately, it comes down to the same thing. They need to get some development parts on that car, and they need to get them on quickly.
I love Toto said yesterday, he said, we were carefully optimistic coming into this season without a sense of entitlement, which I think that sums up Toto Wolff, I think, speaking about the problems that Mercedes face in a kind of majestic way that I would never be able to be eloquent enough to do, which is a shame because it's kind of my job to be eloquent, but there we go. And the drivers had a meeting last night. They always have a safety briefing and a driver's briefing on a Friday after the sessions. Lots of chatter in it about jewellery and about underwear. So just wanted to make sure you're all safety compliant this morning, gents.
What I really want to know is
let's not go there.
All this talk about
How
policing,
policed, yeah.
Exactly, the driver's underwear situation. Who's checking?
Self-police, please. This is not the nanny state that you were looking for or hoping for. But yeah, there was a lot of talk about it. Some with kind of good humour and jest, and others a little bit more serious. But I think it's good that the rules are being enforced. And talking about rules, Sebastian Vettel was fined €5,000 yesterday for taking that scooter from the marshal, driving it on track without permission, not wearing a helmet, taking his hand off the handlebars as well. A bit of a kerfuffle. I know a lot of you are upset, but hey, you were upset last year when the rules weren't consistent, so let's keep it consistent. Right, lecture over. Track action about to get underway in 30 seconds time, so Harry, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jenny Gow. Yes, we're back for FP3 in just a few seconds' time. I'll give you a little countdown in so you can sync up if needs be. But we are back for our final practice session ahead of qualifying this afternoon. So this is the final chance for teams and drivers to make those setup changes needed to get to grips with this tweaked Albert Park circuit. But the session will get going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1... And the green light is on and the session is underway. Max Verstappen not in too much of a hurry to get out. He's being strapped in by his mechanics right now. The sound of cars going out on track, however, can be heard. Lewis Hamilton, not even in his car yet, Mark.
No, having a lazy start to the day, isn't he, Lewis? And I do wonder about Lewis Hamilton in terms of how he's feeling right now, because imagine what life must be like for Lewis, having had 7 or 8 years of utter dominance in this sport, and yet this year, with a whole new set of regulations, a brand new teammate as well alongside him, and he's got a car that is just, at best, midfield right now. They really are genuinely struggling. It's not an easy way to get out of this. It's not a quick fix. And so he could be looking at this kind of struggle for at least the first third of this season, I would say. So a real different set of circumstances that him and the Mercedes team find themselves. A new set of challenges. Look, they're a great team. I'm sure they'll find their way out of it. And perhaps they've got to dig deeper for some motivation this year.
Absolutely. Well, the sound you're hearing is Zhou Guanyu, Kevin Magnussen and Valtteri Bottas, the first cars out on track. But picking up on what you're saying about Lewis Hamilton, Mark, is interesting because Mercedes, well, from all sides of the garage saying, well, they've been struggling with getting tyre temperature into the car this weekend. It looks like they might be in a bit of a battle with Alpine as well and trying to get in front of them. But Hamilton's saying no matter how many changes they make, they're still 1.5, 1.7 seconds down. So you have to wonder what he's thinking, really, isn't it? And especially if you look at the other side of the garage, George Russell, having fought and scraped for so long in his career to make it into Q2, to get points, thinking, yes, finally I've got the chance to be in the top car, and it's not there. How's that going to play on him mentally as well?
Well, I think it's two very different situations. George, of course, this is a huge opportunity for him. It's probably a longer-term opportunity than perhaps Lewis, who's towards the end of his career. George just has to keep beating his teammate. And look, all right, his teammate's Lewis Hamilton. That's no easy thing to do, but he's kind of doing that on a semi-regular basis so far this season. He's putting in some very good performances, given that the car's not working as it should. Eventually, I'm sure they'll get that car up to speed, and if he's got himself up to speed, if he's settled into the team well, which is what he seems to be doing, that will play very nicely for him. But look, the most frustrating time for any Formula One team and driver is when you've got a car that's not quick enough. But even more frustrating than that is when you don't know why, or you can't understand the problem fully, and throwing bits at it, throwing changes to it, don't make the effect or have the impact that you hope they will. That's the most frustrating situation, and that's what Mercedes are in right now.
Yeah, Toto Wolff was talking about it, saying that it's physics applied and actual. And when it comes to the car, they can't model anything. They can't spend a lot of time in the wind tunnel or doing work back at home to try and resolve the issues, because these issues, especially porpoising, don't show themselves in any of the work that they've done. So it was a surprise for all of the teams when they came to the first test and started to see porpoising, because it's not something you can do in the wind tunnel. It's not something you can simulate, and that's the problem that Mercedes face, is that the only time they can try and resolve this is when they're at a track. So all of their free practice 1 and 2 is spent kind of trying to chase this elusive operating window, and also trying to find ways of working on what they can do to develop the car to take this porpoising out and to try and find some efficiency. And that kind of means that they're trying to do 2 jobs of a weekend, where a lot of the other teams are just trying to find setup for their weekend. It's a really tough battle that Mercedes have got, and I think it's going to test the resolve of a lot of fans, especially newer fans to Formula One, who have come in, gone, oh, Mercedes are great, we love them, you know, we're all about the Silver Arrows, and all of a sudden the Silver Arrows are struggling. And you know what it's like when your team in football, who have been cruising along very nicely, Manchester United, suddenly are nowhere. It's hard, and it does test you as a person of, can I stick with this team through thick and thin, or do I actually want to go after a little bit of glory? Nothing wrong with either option.
One of the things that's interesting about this porpoising problem, Jenny, is that they're surprised by it. It was very common in the previous ground effect era. Now, admittedly, that was 40 years ago, and I was only a child back then, but I knew about porpoising before this ground effect era, this new ground effect era. So it's like all the engineers in Formula One didn't read about the previous ground effect era of Formula One. And I don't think it can be a coincidence that the two teams who have experienced engineers who were around in the previous ground effect era are leading the pack at the moment. That's Red Bull and Ferrari, with Adrian Newey and Rory Byrne, who's still a consultant at Ferrari and was quite heavily involved in this new design project for these new rules, who was, of course, the chief designer at Ferrari through the dominant Schumacher-Ross Brawn era. You know, one would imagine that they were aware of this as a potential issue from the very beginnings of the concept of the design of their car, whereas it seems that Mercedes just weren't. And there was an interesting video that the journalist Peter Windsor put on YouTube the other day with Peter Wright, who was involved with Lotus back in the ground effect era and then moved on to work for the FIA. He said that he'd sent a note to James Allison, the Mercedes chief technical officer, saying, "Welcome to the club."
53 minutes, 56, 55, 54, 53 seconds left in this practice 3 session. Zhou, Magnussen, Bottas, Albon, Schumacher, Norris, Ricciardo have all been out and are currently lapping. The sound you're hearing is that of the home hero, Daniel Ricciardo, making his way round on track. Now, I don't want to get people excited, Mark, because...
But you're going to.
But hashtag BBC F1 as well if you want to get involved. But McLaren do look like they are going slightly quicker this weekend. They've both been up in the top 10 during practice. The pace looks okay.
Well, I'd say, yeah, early signs of the weekend were slightly more promising than, say, Bahrain, for example, where they were so slow out the box. I think it surprised everybody. But I think it's perhaps more circuit-specific. It may be that this circuit swings back slightly towards their performance window, because I don't think they've brought too many major upgrades, too many major changes to this car that are going to completely transform its characteristics. But we have seen some early promising signs, and the sound you can hear is Lando Norris on circuit right now, coming through. He's just come through what was the 4th DRS zone. Now that has disappeared, coming into the newly profiled turn 11 towards the end of this lap. Nice and tidy from what we've seen on our screen so far. Down towards the final couple of corners, 12, 13, and out of the final corner and back onto the start-finish straight. We'll see what sort of time Lando can put up so far. DRS wide open as he crosses the line, and that's a 1:21.2, so still some way off the pace from yesterday's practice sessions, but a decent early banker for Lando Norris.
What I find interesting actually is we came into this weekend thinking that this track and the lap times we're going to be massively faster, but actually that's not quite the case of what we've seen yet. Admittedly, they probably haven't gone full whack just yet, qualifying later this afternoon. But Leclerc at the moment, bottom of the speed tracks as well, but his top speeds are still behind what they achieved in qualifying in 2019. Andrew, I don't know if you want to pick up on this, the BBC's chief F1 writer. So is there still more rubber to lay down on this track, or are we actually not going to see it be as fast as we thought we might?
Well, it's going to be faster because there are less corners, and some of the corners have been opened out. But no, I just wanted to mention, you talked about Leclerc's straight line speed there. We saw yesterday from the GPS traces that some of us can get access to after practice sessions in Formula One, that the Red Bull and the Ferrari are showing very similar characteristics to what they showed in the last couple of races, which is that the Ferrari's gaining all its time in the corners and the Red Bull's gaining it all back on the straights, basically. So just as an example, Leclerc was 4/10 quicker than Verstappen in one corner alone, turn 13. Whereas on this run that we're watching Verstappen go down now, from turn 6 to turn 9, Verstappen went on their lap comparisons from a tenth of a second down on Leclerc at the start of that section to 2.5 tenths up on Leclerc at the end of that section down that straight. Now, that's not great news for Ferrari necessarily if the races pan out in the way that they did in Bahrain and Saudi, with the cars very closely matched on pace. If Verstappen is ahead or behind Leclerc, because Leclerc's going to have problem defending. It might be less difficult for him now they've removed this extra DRS zone, but fundamentally, in the end, once Verstappen got in the DRS zone of Leclerc in Saudi Arabia, there was nothing Leclerc could do to defend against him. And it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend if that transpires to be the case again. And that's why Leclerc on Thursday, before the cars had even turned a wheel, was saying that he expected this to be more of a Red Bull track than a Ferrari one.
What's fascinating about that is the lap times are almost identical, yet they're both generating them in completely different ways, as Andrew says there. I think what's going to play out during the race with that is that, or what could play out, is how differently those two cars manage their tyres, because one of them, the Ferrari, has a lot more downforce and then clearly more drag on the car. That's going to be an easier car on its tyres, whereas the Red Bull, much higher speed, much less drag, but less downforce, might start to slide the tyres around more, might get a bit more graining, and therefore a bit more degradation in the tyres. So that's going to be a really interesting one to watch come Sunday.
Yeah, speaking to Pirelli about tyres, they reckon this is going to be a one-stop, a hard and medium race. The soft, because it's a different category of soft, and they've gone with the C5 tyre, so the softest one they can. They think that it's likely that will just be a qualifying tyre. So there we go, that's good to know. But Max Verstappen yesterday was saying the Ferrari looks like a rocket. So I think there's some mind games going on as well, but it's interesting that he's definitely watching his nearest competitors closely.
It's Formula One. There's always mind games going on. Equally, the games were being played last time out with the DRS detection point, especially in Saudi Arabia. And with this loss of the DRS through 8 up to 9 mark, that detection zone 1, they're calling it, has been now put just before turn 9. Detection zone 2 to get the DRS on the main straight is before turn 13, the penultimate corner. So I imagine it's a little bit unlikely to see a little bit of DRS chicken being played before turn 9 because there's such a high-speed corner, but we could well see that into turn 13.
I can definitely see it happening, and the main reason being that one detection zone gives you 2 activation zones, so you get 2 lots of DRS if you get it through that particular one detection zone. So it's quite valuable to have through the whole start-finish straight, then through turns 1, after turns 1 and 2, there's then another zone. So it's really worth having. So I do think that could well play into being a feature again, which is, I know we had some entertainment from it last time out, but for me, it's not Formula One. For me, it's something that we need to start thinking about moving forward. It does mean that cars can tend to overtake each other, then stay in the fight and come back, and that's what we're hoping for. But perhaps these cars now are more likely to be able to do that anyway without DRS, and I'm sure that is exactly what Formula One are looking into as we go through these early races of 2022.
The sound you're hearing was on board with Sebastian Vettel. We're now off board on a lap with the German, who has not had the smoothest of starts to his, 2022 season, missing the opening 2 rounds due to COVID. He's back for Australia, but it all ended rather early in FP2, in FP1 yesterday, I should say, with a power unit issue. Didn't even get out in FP2 while they changed that whole unit over. And Jenny, he hasn't received a penalty for that. They've still got enough in the tank for that, but it's not been ideal for Vettel, especially to get to grips with the altered track layout.
Yeah, and he's coming off the back of 2 COVID missed races, so it's frustrating for him that he hasn't had the time to sit in the car and get track action. And the delay yesterday, well, firstly, they only had 2 hours between free practice 1 and free practice 2, which is a shorter amount of time than usual. And then, on top of that, it took a long time for them to get the car back into the garage at Aston Martin. Presumably, the marshal was too busy trying to sort out where his moped had gone. But yeah, it took them a long time to get the car back, which is why they only started late on replacing the power unit. By that point, game over. They already knew that they weren't going to get out for the second session, so they gave it a go, but to very little effect. So yeah, I think Vettel's got a lot of work to do today. He's missed an awful lot of time in that car, and it's not the easiest car to drive. It's not performing, once again, as the team would have wanted. So yes, lots of work for Vettel to do, and it's also worth bearing in mind when they delivered the news about his €5,000 fine for going on track with the scooter after the session. A host of other rulings came down, and one of them was for impeding. Now, a couple of drivers, Hamilton, Sainz and Stroll, I think it was, no further action. I want to check on that Stroll one. Now I've said it, I'm not 100% sure. But the other one was for Tsunoda, and he did get a reprimand for impeding. Yeah, it was no further action for Stroll. So a reprimand for Tsunoda for impeding, and I think it is definitely going to be a feature later on in qualifying, with cars kind of getting in the way of each other on sort of slow laps and then on their fast laps. So something to look out for.
Absolutely, it really is going to be a qualifying, try and avoid the traffic if you can in qualifying. 44 minutes, 53, 52, 51, 50 seconds left on the clock in practice 3. We're riding on board with Charles Leclerc. Is the sound you're hearing right now, though. It's Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen leading the way. Perez with a 1:21.0 on the medium compound tyre. Norris third, Russell fourth, Zhou in fifth. They're all on the soft. That it's Magnussen, Bottas, Albon and Schumacher, but actually it's only the top 4 who have set competitive lap times right now. So still lots of track action to come. Leclerc, though, is on a fast lap at the moment, coming through the middle sector. He's gone purple, trying to find a little bit more time. He was getting a bit annoyed, I saw, earlier this weekend, because it's come out in the news this week that people are calling him a 2.0 version this year, a new version. He's matured as a racing driver, but he doesn't really think he's changed that much. Have you seen any kind of obvious change?
No, but this is the nature of Formula One, isn't it? You get a good car, you look like a hero. If you've not got a great car, you know, people look on from the outside and suspect you're not the best. Lewis Hamilton is going to find out the other way around. I mean, he's got great history behind him, but new fans to the sport might come in and look at Lewis as a mid-pack driver and take a sort of misplaced judgment of him.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's been annoyed by that, because the person who came out with it first apparently was Marc Genet, who's a Ferrari advisor. I actually think Marc's wrong. I think Leclerc's always been an absolute star. You know, he's from the minute he stepped into a Formula One car, even before then, he's looked absolutely sensational. He's blisteringly fast. And he put in some of the best drives of last year. I mean, how did he get that Ferrari onto pole in Azerbaijan, for example? And his drive at Silverstone, where he very, very nearly won, admittedly Hamilton had a penalty, was also outstanding. And people looked at, it's often the problem in Formula One, people look at some of the headline results and don't look at what's underneath them. They saw that Sainz ended up ahead of him in the championship, but they didn't remember that Leclerc didn't take part in Monaco, where he was on pole, because, okay, he crashed in qualifying and then Ferrari hadn't spotted a problem and the car retired before the race started. He was taken out at the start in Hungary in that big pilot with Valtteri Bottas and Lance Stroll. And had it not been for those two results, he'd probably have won Monaco and would have finished very high up in Hungary, where Sainz was on the podium. So it was a false position that people were seeing. He was quicker than Sainz in qualifying. He was definitely the star Ferrari driver last year. Impressive though Sainz was. So I find it slightly odd that people are talking about someone who's always been outstanding. The fact he's now got a competitive car, he looks outstanding. Well, what do you expect? Of course he's going to look outstanding.
Yeah, and you know, it is a really good point, because people measure Formula One drivers almost entirely by their results, and that's not the full picture. And I always used to think, when I worked with drivers inside the team, you get such a different viewpoint of how good a driver is, or what they bring to the party, or how much commitment, how much dedication they have. And those things, the things that they do sometimes out of the car, are as important as what they do inside the car in terms of how good a driver they are, how good a team player they are. There's a lot more to driving the car, just as opposed to which position you cross the finish line.
Charles Leclerc's annoyed, Andrew Benson's annoyed, Mark Priestley's annoyed. We're not calling him 2.0 Charles anymore. As we watch a replay on board with Sergio Perez coming through the final corner, just clouding the curve
to the wall, isn't he?
Well, actually, that brings up an interesting point I wanted to discuss with you. Listening to Alex Albon chatting yesterday through a lap of this revised Melbourne circuit, especially where we've just saw Perez come through on the exit of turn 14, coming onto the main straight, but also as well coming through turn 5, where they brought in the wall. So there's really not a lot of runoff anymore. They brought in the wall, the concrete wall, but the adjoining wall just before it attaches, but at a slight joint, at a slight angle. And he says that's actually incredibly dangerous for us, because how early these Formula One cars exit the corners due to the downforce that's on them means that they could very, very easily clip that wall and completely destroy the front left. And because of how tight Melbourne is, that could absolutely cause carnage behind them.
Yeah, I mean, street circuits have these sort of nuances which have to be figured out sometimes. They are often concrete barriers positioned at the start of a race weekend. And as we go through Friday, as Jenny mentioned earlier on, the drivers have this opportunity on a Friday evening to go through their driver's briefing and raise any concerns like this. So Alex will have brought that up. I'm sure other drivers, if it was an incident, would have brought it up. As Lewis Hamilton bounces off through the gravel, just about skims the wall at low speed, but those side pods, well, what side pods that Mercedes has, which aren't very big, are going to be full of gravel.
Now, we don't often see a mistake like that from Lewis Hamilton in practice, as with one of the Aston Martins of Sebastian Vettel goes straight into the wall, skirting the gravel, and absolutely clouts the front left as well. We're riding on board. That is a red flag. It's coming up to the fast left-hander of turn 9. So the former DRS zone, that's been scrapped. He's approaching turn 9, riding on board. He turns in. All looks okay at the moment, through 10, and then just loses the back across the gravel and straight into the wall, Mark.
Oh, his weekend goes from bad to worse.
Sorry, guys.
That car is in a mess. He's ripped off the front suspension. I think he hit the rear end as well. And having just spent all of yesterday in the garage replacing the power unit, well, his team have got a huge amount of work to do now to get that car ready for qualifying in a limited amount of time. That's definitely, the whole front end needs replacing. It looks like potentially both corners. He hit the rear end as well. That could potentially damage a gearbox, as the drive shafts often get punched in with that impact inside the gearbox as well. We know that if that happens, you end up with grid penalties. So a disastrous weekend, a disastrous return to Formula One in 2022 so far for Sebastian Vettel.
Well, he is out of the car and puts his steering wheel back. He'll know not to get a scooter back this time, but he'll find his way back. Mike Crack, the team principal of Aston Martin, watching on, not giving away anything on his face yet, but that is a huge disappointment for the Aston Martin team, is what has been a trying weekend so far and a trying start to their 2022 campaign.
Well, we just saw images there on screen of the team reacting to that as he went in, watching the replays, and I can absolutely sympathise with what that feels like, because it is a sinking feeling when you watch your car go into the barriers. Your first concern is always going to be for the driver, but as soon as he gets out, as Sebastian has, he's now walking across the track. I wonder if he'll get into trouble for that, wandering across the racetrack on his own, as there's still cars out, so we'll keep an eye on that one. But from the team's perspective, they have a huge amount of work in front of them, and it is a massive sinking feeling, I can tell you.
Yeah.
So the replay comes again. Yeah, he just went through turn 10, got a real snap on in the middle of the apex of turn 10, and just there's no runoff. It's just straight onto the gravel, and then you're into a wall, and that's what happened. Yeah, a little snap of oversteer, corrected it, and yeah, he's gone in reasonably heavily.
It was just the slightest of snaps, but he makes his way back. Currently a red flag.
Sorry, I lost the car.
Copy that.
Sorry. Yeah. Reasonably big shot. I'm sorry about that.
Are you okay? Are you okay?
9 and 10. Yeah, I'm fine.
So you can hear there Vettel on the radio, reasonably big shunt. Mick Schumacher did stop right behind him just to check that he was okay. Gives him the thumbs up, he carries on, but Vettel trundles back to the pit lane, Jenny.
Yeah, costly mistake for Vettel there, and so it's so good that drivers are slowing to check on other drivers these days. I know it's happened many times, but there's a real affinity between certain drivers, and Schumacher and Vettel go way back. They raced together at a Race of Champions. There's definitely a paternal element of Vettel towards Schumacher, and it was just nice to see Schumacher checking on him in return. Vettel getting a lift back the appropriate way on the back of a scooter now, being driven by somebody else, so that's good to know. Don't hold on to the scooter too much when you get back to the paddock. But in all seriousness, it's a huge problem for teams with crashes this year. Because of the cost cap, they don't have the sort of spare parts floating around. It's also early in the season, so there's a lot of development happening very quickly. And if you look at the Haas team, for example, they don't have a spare chassis with them this weekend because of the damage that happened last time out with Mick's car. So there's a high-risk strategy going on out there for a lot of these teams. They'll have to work very hard to get that car ready for qualifying. And it's just, as Mark said, it's so soul-destroying for them. They've worked hard yesterday, and then they look up and see the car in the barrier. Of course, no one's going to cast aspersions. It's one of those things, it happens when you're trying to push to the very limits in a Formula One car. But really unfortunate for Aston Martin as they look on. And let's hope they get the car back a little quicker today than they did yesterday, because that was one of the things that hampered them. And they've got a tight turnaround to get it ready for qualifying now.
They have, and you know, the other real problem here is that Sebastian Vettel, having missed, of course, the first 2 races, goes into qualifying on a street circuit where it's all about getting your confidence up, getting into the groove as a driver. He goes into qualifying where it really matters, having had almost no relevant track time, and that's going to be a really big impact. He'll be nervous as he gets back into the seat, as if he does get back into the seat with that car repaired ahead of qualifying. He'll be nervous going through corners. He won't be able to push to the same limits that he would have done had he been gradually building his confidence, and that will hurt his lap time, undoubtedly.
Well, we are currently under a red flag situation. The time continues to go down, though, but at the moment only 15 cars have set a lap time. We'll run through them all for you now. Alonso, Sainz, Ricciardo the top 3, Perez, Bottas, Leclerc the top 6, Russell, Verstappen, Norris, Ocon the top 10. Then it's Zhou, Albon, Schumacher, Latifi and Hamilton the last with any kind of lap time on the board. Magnussen, Vettel, Gasly, Stroll and Tsunoda yet to set a lap time. Vettel, of course, will not be setting a lap time during this session, as his Aston Martin is craned away by the marshals, doing an excellent job all weekend round, but you can just see the wheel, the front left, hanging on by its tethers. And that's going to be a big rebuild job, Mark. You've been there as the mechanic when you've seen your drivers have a huge shunt. What are they going to be feeling in the garage right now?
Heartbreak, absolute heartbreak, particularly after yesterday, as I said earlier. But it is just heartbreak because it just translates into a huge amount of work in a short amount of time under a huge amount of pressure. Apart from that, you're going to miss your lunch. It's lunchtime after this session. There's no time for that anymore. So, yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation. But having said that, that is exactly what these guys are incredibly good at. That's what they're there for. And when it comes to moments like that, that's when Formula One teams and the people inside a Formula One team come alive. You know, that's what they kind of live for, these big moments where they can do their thing under pressure and make a difference. Because when they get that car out, assuming they do for qualifying, it'll be an enormous sense of achievement. They get their driver back out onto the track and give him the opportunity to try and rescue something from a very difficult weekend. And whilst the driver can bring an awful lot, we give a lot of accolades and credit to the driver when they pull something special out the bag. These are the moments when the mechanics and engineers get to do their part in the weekend and perhaps have some similar impact.
Former Chief McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley speaking there alongside me. Harry Benjamin also joining us is the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson and Jenny Gao. This is practice 3, 32 minutes, 33, 32, 31 seconds on the clock. Currently under a red flag. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can use the hashtag BBCF1 or you can email us. It's f1@bbc.co.uk. Jenny.
Yes, so the driver's briefing that happened last night, I thought I'd just bring this up for discussion while we're under red flag situations, because it lasted a while. Lasted longer than this session. It was a 2-hour meeting that the drivers had with the FIA race director, Nils Vittich, and numerous things were spoken about. So we've got driver underwear, we've got jewellery, both of which are being clamped down upon. It's been a rule for a very long time. It's just a reminder to the drivers that they must wear appropriate attire for safety reasons, not just because Vittich wants them to. It has been around for a long time. It was just highlighted this weekend. The DRS zone we've spoken about already, that's changed overnight because of concerns I believe that Fernando Alonso had. He pointed out, and the FIA have reacted. They asked other drivers what they thought and felt about the DRS zones, and it was agreed, so they've changed it. And talking about Albon and his thoughts about safety, he probably would have brought it up, and clearly it's not something that others are too worried about. Otherwise they would have looked at it and changed it overnight. I'm fairly confident of that. But just the final point that they brought up was all about the safety car restarts. Do you remember last time out, guys, we saw Verstappen come right alongside Leclerc when they were behind the safety car and towards the restart. And the FIA have now actually issued some pictures, little diagrams to the teams to clarify in the race director's notes exactly what is and is not allowed. So you're now not allowed to draw your car up alongside or go further beyond the car in front of you. You have to stay either directly behind or behind but to the side of the rear wing, you are not allowed to take your car further ahead of the lead car than that. So just thought I'd update you.
Well, that was a Verstappen classic, really. It wasn't just last time out. We've seen that done multiple times, Andrew Benson.
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear on what's allowed and what's not under the safety car, these diagrams, they've got basically drawn a line behind the car in front across its very last bit of the car, and they've basically said the car behind cannot have any part of itself overlapping with the car in front behind the safety car, which is something that the drivers have definitely been doing in recent years, even though they shouldn't do. And people with long memories might remember back to the 1994 British Grand Prix, when Michael Schumacher actually went ahead of Damon Hill on one of the formation laps and ended up getting a black flag and being disqualified from the race for it. Nothing like that's happened since, but they're obviously trying to clamp down on that. On the jewellery front, Lewis Hamilton was obviously involved quite heavily in those discussions. He's still wearing his nose ring, I should say. So he must have, either he's clarified that that's allowed, or he's decided to just think, stuff it, I'm going to keep it in anyway.
The cameraman knew what he was doing for that shot, didn't he?
Well, do you know what I always used to think about that? I mean, as a member of the Formula One team, we spent so much time and energy and resource on trying to shave hundredths of a gram off the weight of a Formula One car, and then the driver turns up with a watch or a they don't wear watches anymore, but nose rings, earrings, whatever, gold chains as they used to in the old days. And I used to think that's ridiculous, because I've just spent probably hundreds of thousands of pounds of the team's money trying to save that amount of weight, and you've just got it hanging around your neck. So I'm not surprised that they're going to clamp down on that. It's obviously a safety thing more than anything else to do with performance. Just quickly on that safety car restart thing, we obviously had a bit of controversy, or potential controversy, in that extremely controversial race at the end of last season in Abu Dhabi, where at that final restart Max Verstappen was kind of doing exactly the same thing, wasn't he? Almost getting himself in front of Lewis Hamilton before the restart happened. What's tricky about what they've said here is no part of the car behind can venture in front of the rearwardmost part of the car in front, is because during that restart, where they're trying to warm up tyres and brakes, of course the pace is constantly, slowing and upping, isn't it? Cars are constantly on the brakes, warming them, spinning the tyres up, launching away to get some temperature into those. So managing that pace and not getting any part of your car in front of that imaginary line at the back of the one in front is going to be very difficult to police.
Massively so. So what will be one to watch out for as we hear the cars back out on track. 27 minutes on the clock, so it's going to be a bit of a sprint really till the end to try and get some more data. What are the teams and the drivers going to be hoping to sort of extract from the rest of this session now with that red flag disruption?
Well, it's kind of getting ready for qualifying now. They've done most of their long run work yesterday. They are on the medium tyres for the most part from what I can see at this stage, so there might be a couple of slightly longer runs on those. Qualifying, you would imagine, in the most part, is going to be on the softer tyre, the red-walled tyre, with the race tending to play out, we expect, on the white-walled hard and the yellow-walled medium tyre. But towards the end of this session, it will be getting the drivers and the teams just fine-tuned before that all-important set of qualifying laps later on. So we're currently on board with Max Verstappen on his first run after the red flag. Very, very fast, Max Verstappen in that car. Very, very close in pace to the Ferraris of both Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz at the top of the timesheets. Max now coming through the long sweeping section that was a DRS zone yesterday, but no longer today. That DRS zone been removed. He goes through 9 and 10. Turn 10 is where Sebastian Vettel just had his incident. Onto this straight here. This is a DRS zone down towards the reprofile turn 11. Deeper on the brakes, a tighter turn in. He keeps that nice and tidy over the curves a little bit. Bit of traffic ahead as he comes through 12 into 13, the penultimate corner. Nice and... oh no, he's spun, and Max Verstappen, I'm not quite sure what happened there. It seemed like a slow motion spin as he went into turn 13, but he's ended up on the grass and chooses not to go back into the pit lane. He's going to go for another lap.
What's interesting about that, Mark, is he did similar thing. He didn't spin yesterday, but he was struggling in that section of the lap yesterday as well through P2. he made a number of mistakes. He had traffic too, but one of the reasons that Verstappen didn't put his lap together, as we see a replay of that spin at the penultimate corner onto the grass, was because he was struggling with the car. Now, he said that towards the end of the session, he admitted after the session that he'd been unhappy with the balance, but they got it into the window towards the end of the session. Look there, that it was a more extreme example of it, but it was very similar to the sort of problems he was having yesterday.
It looked like he had almost no tyre temperature, and it almost like he was on ice. And the nature of these cars this year is much more of the downforce is produced underneath the car, and it's produced predominantly at high speed. That was a very slow speed corner. This is a low drag Red Bull that we're looking at this season so far. That's why they're so fast on the straights, the middle sector of this lap. Coming towards the end of the lap, where you actually want a bit more downforce, really. The Ferrari looked stronger in that section. He just looked like he had no grip. So perhaps a combination of low downforce, colder tyres on those mediums, perhaps a bit of graining, and he ended up facing the wrong way.
He's clearly pushing massively, isn't it? It is so tight between certainly the Red Bulls and Ferraris right now, but it's the Alpine of Fernando Alonso by 1,000th of a second goes fastest with a 1:19.9 ahead of Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris. Then it's Carlos Sainz and Valtteri Bottas, the top 5. Ricciardo, Perez, Ocon, Russell, Zhou, the top 10. Verstappen, Magnussen, Albon, Schumacher, Latifi and Tsunoda, the top 16. Gasly and Hamilton make up 17th and 18th. No times on the board yet for either of the Aston Martin cars. Vettel obviously out of this session and Stroll last.
I just don't get why I'm spinning. It's really hard to feel the balance at the moment.
Max Verstappen on the radio there, just echoing sort of your thoughts, just really pushing, doesn't understand why though. So, I mean, going into qualifying later, he needs to get that sorted sooner rather than later, doesn't he?
He definitely does. He's on that medium tyre. He's continued and cleaned those tyres up and gone for another lap. We just see another replay of that spin he had a moment ago. It was such a low speed incident, almost comical really when you watch him from the outside, but frustrating from a driver's perspective. Most other drivers now on the soft tyre preparing for qualifying. Max persisting on that medium tyre, just with one eye on perhaps tweaking that setup for the race before he then switches onto the softs within the last 20 minutes of this session. But Perez now on the soft tyres in the other Red Bull, going very quickly so far.
Yeah, well, we think this soft C5 tyre, brand new for this season, well, its debut this weekend, is probably only going to be used in qualifying. So this is a good chance to get perhaps what we might get later on for the race grid. Perez does go fastest, but loses a little bit of time in that final sector. It's still a personal best, but a purple sector 1 and 2. He puts in a 1:19.7 to go almost 2 tenths clear of Fernando Alonso. Leclerc 3rd, Norris 4th, Sainz 5th. Gasly just slots up into 8th position as well. Jenny.
Perez has been so impressive so far this season.
Yeah.
I know we're only 3 races in, but he's definitely found a harmony with this car. His driving style, I think, suits it, and he's definitely found something.
He definitely has. I'll tell you what the Mercedes cars are finding, though, the gravel, because George Russell has just had a skirt across it as well. So that's 2 Mercedes cars into the gravel in this FP2 session. We've talked about it so much already, but the Mercedes are just stuck. Where is Russell at the moment? He's down in 11th with a 1:28. He's on the soft tyre, so he's hoping to go for a fast run, but that's on the exit of 3. He's gone into the gravel and then cut across turn 4.
But you know what? I love this. I love the fact that we're seeing mistakes, not just from the Mercedes, and no one wants to see one particular driver or team struggle, but across the board here, we are seeing mistakes punished. We're seeing drivers stepping over the limit, and that limit being a kind of brutal fine line. And for me, that is exactly what driving a Formula One car should be like. We don't want it to be too easy. We don't want it to appear to be too easy. We want the drivers to be on the limit, pushing all the time, exhausted at the end of a Grand Prix, and that's what we're seeing this year. So for me, these changes in 2022, although we've only got a small data set to go from so far, are kind of working. I love it.
They are pushing hard as well. Fernando Alonso pushing hard. He's just gone to the top of the timing screens. And let's talk about Alonso, actually, because Jackie has tweeted us. She wants to talk about Alonso, so we're going to talk about Alonso. She's a McLaren fan, but also an Alonso fan. He's doing well this weekend at the moment. He's holding his own again. Is he an outside bet for a podium this weekend? The middle sector seems to be Alpine's strongest part of this track. If things ahead of them go wrong for Ferrari, Red Bull, Alpine could well be there to pick up the pieces.
I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility. I think they have got some good top speed in that car this weekend, so they've managed to dump a bit of drag. Along with that typically comes dumping some downforce, but they seem to be managing it. Actually, his final sector on the run that's put in top of the timesheets was actually purple, so he was quickest of anybody in the final sector. So a good combination of performance between the high and lower speed stuff for that car.
Yeah, I'm still trying to temper people's enthusiasm and excitement on this one. And I know there are lots of Alonso fans, lots of Alpine fans, but they do have some reliability issues with that car. Remember, he's already on his third power unit for the season. So first, they've got to finish the race to score some points. And that seems to be a weakness. And I know this is round 3 of the World Championship, but Australia is usually a race of attrition because sometimes it's the first round. But we saw a lot of people having problems last time out in Saudi, so I wouldn't discount people having problems here as well. It's still very early in the season, and people are trying to get on top of these cars. So, yes, you could get a surprise podium, but I think you need to look at people who have got really strong reliability. I'm going to eat my words tomorrow, aren't I? Alonso wins the race. Sorry.
Well, as you were chatting, Jenny, Sergio Perez has just gone fastest, so the battle for that top spot is well and truly on. 1:19.458 for Perez. That's 0.2 quicker than Alonso. The sound you're hearing is Lewis Hamilton. He's gone purple in the first sector, a personal best in the middle sector, and another one in the final sector sees him put in a 1:23, and that slots him behind his old teammate Valtteri Bottas in 8th.
But the car looked like a real handful coming through that final sector. He was fighting at the steering wheel, and I mean, a glimmer of hope that he's managed a purple sector and a decent first sector of the lap in terms of time, but overall it puts him only 8th, and that is the fact that he's probably relatively happy with that right now is a big sign of where they are at the moment. That car does not look easy to drive.
No, and Russell as well going around only 12th at the moment for the two Mercedes cars. Norris doing well though, up in 5th at the moment. He's just behind Max Verstappen. Carlos Sainz 6th, Bottas 7th, then it's Hamilton 8th, Ricciardo in 9th, and rounding out the top 10 is Esteban Ocon. Talking of George Russell, that is the sound you're hearing right now, riding on board, approaching the newly reprofiled turn 11, getting very close on the left-hand side to the white line.
Just all over the place.
And echoing what you were suggesting, Mark, that this car is just a bit all over the place.
Well, it's both cars, isn't it? And it's just an inherent problem in that there's a combination of things here. Let's listen to Carlos.
I nearly crashed because of Latifi. So he cannot let me by in such a dangerous place.
That's Carlos Sainz complaining about Nicholas Latifi getting his way whilst on a hot lap, and quite frankly he did, so I'm sure the stewards might take a look at that. But yeah, Lewis Hamilton now on our screens just showing the struggles that he faced around that lap. It's a combination of the porpoising or the bouncing that the car suffers that we've talked about a lot, but also the fact they can't get those tyres into the right operating window, and it's so easy to underestimate how much of a difference that makes to your car. It can literally transform your car from a mid-table car to a top-of-the-table car if you get the tyres in the right window, and of course vice versa if you don't.
What we're seeing from the Mercedes at the moment is exactly what the drivers were talking about after the practice sessions yesterday, or at least talking to the team about, which was a lack of confidence in the rear end, and we're seeing that with both cars, as you were saying, Mark. As soon as they turn the wheel to try to get into the corner, the rear end goes loose, basically. We saw almost identical incidents with Russell and Hamilton at turn 11. Hamilton went into the gravel. Russell managed to stay out of the gravel but off the track, and that's what we were seeing for Hamilton through that final sector. And again, we've just seen it on the entry into turns 9 and 10, which is 155 mile an hour left right, where Vettel crashed a few minutes ago. It's sapping the driver's confidence at Mercedes, and it doesn't look like they've been able to find a solution for it overnight at all.
Ferraris have been interesting at this session. Carlos Sainz has just gone back to the top of the timesheets with a 1:19.4, just fractionally ahead of Sergio Perez. But earlier on in this session, they looked like they had a little bit more top speed, and I wonder if they've just played around between yesterday and today in dropping a little bit of downforce, trying to drop a bit of drag as a result, and perhaps finding that sweet spot, because although the top speed has come back towards the car, they haven't had the overall lap time so far in this session. I wonder if a bit of tweaking around with aero levels might be what's going on at Ferrari, and perhaps they're edging closer to the sweet spot with Sainz now back top of the table.
The sound of former F1 chief mechanic Mark Priestley alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, BBC Sport chief F1 writer Andrew Benson's here too, and is Jenny Gow as well as here.
Yeah, just having a look at what Charles Leclerc is up to, actually. He's getting some decent speed out, but he's currently in P4 in the pit lane. But he did do a double push lap when he was out there, so we've seen Ferrari doing slightly different things with regards to warm-up last time out as well. They did push, cool down, and then push, and sometimes double cool down. So interesting to watch what they're up to. So 2 push laps in a row for Charles, and then he came into the pits.
That could actually, sorry Harry, that could actually link in with what I was saying. If they were trying to drop downforce levels to try and increase top speed, that might take an extra lap of pushing to get temperature into the tyres to avoid the graining issues that you otherwise might see. Max Verstappen had to do that with his low downforce car in previous races, so that might all link in.
They were also talking yesterday, the Ferrari drivers, particularly Carlos Sainz, about this characteristic that we saw in Jeddah as well, which was that the soft tyres are just getting faster and faster for them, which it shouldn't be the case. So at least it's not the way Pirelli's normally work. Some other tyres do work like that, but usually with Pirelli tyres, you do a push lap, you have to back off, you do another lap, and the pace goes away slightly each time you push on them. Ferrari were finding that they were actually going quicker on the used tyres, both in Jeddah and yesterday here in Melbourne. So maybe that's what Leclerc's experimenting with. Again, finding that maybe he's thinking that 2 consecutive flat-out laps are going to help him gain some speed if the tyres can hold on like that. Yeah. It's quite a confusing picture, actually, because at the same time as them saying that, it's very clear that the soft tyre has graining problems and isn't going to be a tyre that people want to choose for the race. The race looks like a one-stop on medium and hard. So I'm struggling to get my head around that, but it is a phenomenon the Ferrari drivers are experiencing.
Well, it won't be long to wait till we find out all of the undoings of free practice 3 and qualifying coming up later this afternoon. It is Sainz on top right now with a 1:19.4 ahead of Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso, currently going around on another lap. We did, though, Mark, just see in the garage their reserve driver, Oscar Piastri, of course, the Australian Formula 2 champion, Formula 3 champion, Formula Renault Euro Cup champion, desperate for a seat on this grid. I think it's actually a little bit of a travesty that he's not on the grid. He's one of the most successful junior drivers coming up right now, but no room at the inn, it seems. And Alonso going well right now, and he's come out this week saying, actually, I think I'm going to stick around for a couple of more years. So what does that mean for Piastri?
It's one of those frustrating times, isn't it? As a young driver, he's on the fringes. I mean, he's inside that garage. He's at a Grand Prix weekend. He's as close as you're going to get without actually getting in the car, and he just needs the opportunity. We have got, of course, a new rule in Formula 1 this year where teams have to run a rookie driver on, I think it's 2 Friday sessions over the course of the 2022 season. So I'm sure we'll see him in the car at some point. But he needs the opportunity, like all young drivers do. They need somebody to move on to be able to open a door for them to step into. And look, we've had drivers up until quite recently hanging around for quite a long time. Kimi Raikkonen stepped out of his seat, which has opened the door to somebody else. And we need drivers like this to eventually start to move on. Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Valtteri Bottas potentially coming towards the latter stages of their careers. So these doors will open, but if it doesn't open at the right time for you, when you hit your sweet spot as a young driver, it can be incredibly frustrating.
Do you think the winner of the Formula 2 championship should automatically go up into Formula 1 as a prize, essentially? A bit like, you know, if you're top of the championship, Champions League, you go up to the Premier League. It's
a really good point and an interesting point, but who's going to pay for it? Who's going to give him that seat? That's the complication. Do you have, you know, a Formula 1 run team where there's an entry that somebody else runs? Because the trouble's always going to be who's going to pay for that. You know, are Formula 1 going to subsidise that drive? And if you are, that means that one team has to constantly open their door every year to a new driver. That eradicates any long-term contracts you might want to have. It does become very complicated, but yes, as an idea, I love it. Just the practicalities are tricky.
The other thing is that not all Formula 2 drivers, all Formula 2 champions are the same. You know, Charles Leclerc amazing. Nicholas Latifi, not. You know, so just because you win the F2 Championship doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be an amazing Formula 1 driver.
Point. Yeah,
it is a very good point. Jenny, have you got some thoughts on this?
So harsh.
I'm glad you said it.
At like 10 to 5 in the morning is just cutting Latifi down.
Well, you're telling me Nicholas Latifi is amazing. Come on, Jenny.
I could not possibly say that, but we've had other Formula 2 champions in the booth, and I would say they were equally as brilliant. Oh, I'm glad we've got this roster of talent on this weekend. That's all I am saying. Just on Piastri, he is an immense talent. That is very clear to see. And we will get to see him in 2 free practice sessions this year because the rules have changed. So they have to put young drivers into their cars in 2 of the sessions, which I think is a good development. However, this battle, while we're talking about Australia specifically, this battle between Ricciardo, who obviously has a race seat at McLaren, and you could say is on... He needs to perform, let's put it that way. And Piastri, who's coming up, who is going to be adored by Australian fans. They already know of him and about him in a way that I wouldn't have expected for a Formula 2 champion. And I just wonder, is there room for 2 Australians in Formula 1? Could we see both of them, or is it kind of a one-in, one-out system? Because I don't know if Daniel's got the longevity now to hold on to a seat and for both of them to be in F1.
Well, there was the crossover with Webber and Ricciardo, wasn't there? But arguably Webber was obviously in the one of the top cars at the time, and Ricciardo, I think, was just stepping into Toro Rosso. So,
yeah, I can't see any reason why you can't have 2 of any nationality in the sport. There's obviously no reason why that can't happen. Ricciardo, as a case on his own, has to step things up. And I have a lot of sympathy for Daniel, because we know how good he is as a driver. And this is kind of touching what we talked about earlier. We know how good he is. He hasn't suddenly lost all of his talent. He's just struggling to get this particular car to work for him with his driving style. And that is something that's tricky. It's difficult. It's like trying to learn to write with your left hand when you spent all of your time writing with your right hand. You know, it can be as big a change sometimes when a car has a characteristic that you need to adapt your driving style to match. And I think people often underestimate that. Of course, that's what the best drivers need to be able to do, and Daniel needs to get on top of this because his time will run out, but he hasn't lost his talent. He's still an incredible Formula 1 driver. I hope, for his sake and for the sake of everybody at McLaren, that he can pull it together fairly soon.
It's also actually been more difficult for Ricciardo, as we just see an onboard of Verstappen.
Got a bit of understeer now.
Yeah, just confirming understeering off, coming out of turn, where is that, turn 5?
That's really interesting, because he's obviously come back into the pits, changed the car to get rid of the oversteer that he was suffering from before, and they've gone the other way, but they obviously weren't expecting that to happen. They're clearly really struggling to get that Red Bull into the right balanced sweet spot, as they all in Formula 1 call it, which is really interesting after such a strong start to the season.
Yeah, and yesterday it was a battle between Ferrari and Red Bull. Right now, McLaren has come to the fore, and Lando Norris currently the fastest lap time in the 1:19.1 ahead of Sainz and Perez. We ride on board with Alonso, but I just wanted to finish off that point quickly on Ricciardo. Wanted to say that actually he's one of the drivers that's perhaps been affected more so by the COVID restrictions that have been in place the last years, because obviously the reason we haven't been to Australia in the last 3 years is because of how intensive their lockdown has been. He hasn't been able to see his family. He had to isolate for nearly a month, I think, in a hotel before he could go home and see them over the winter. So that's really tough mentally as well.
Well, that is tough mentally. I think the struggles he's going through on track are equally as tough, and because they've gone on for quite a while now, it's natural that you're going to start to question your own ability. You're going to start to have questions about, can you still do it? And once those things start creeping in, the mental battle becomes a huge one, even bigger than any physical battle that Formula 1 throws up. But look, there are positive signs for McLaren. Norris top of the timesheets now with a 19.1. That's the fastest lap we've seen all weekend. Don't care what you say about that, what configuration they're running. That is a fast lap, and no one else has been able to match it. Ricciardo also up in the top 5. So things suddenly starting to look a little better for the orange team.
Ahead.
Sorry, mate. Sorry.
No, go on, Andrew.
This is just a really odd session, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Fernando Alonso, who's second currently, just a 10th off Lando Norris, was saying we've just seen Max Verstappen have a huge wobble through turns 1 and 2. He nearly lost it in a big way there. Still struggling with that car, obviously. Sorry, to go back to the point I was making, Fernando Alonso was saying yesterday, because he was 4th quickest yesterday, looking impressive, although not as impressive as he is right now. He's saying, look, we've not really got any major differences to the car here. There's no way we're going to have found 8 or 9 tenths to get into the battle with Red Bull and Ferrari. So just calm down, basically, about their competitiveness. And if that's true for Alpine, and that is the way Formula One works, let's be honest, it's doubly so for McLaren, who've been at least half a second or so off Alpine's pace so far this year. So to see Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso first and second on the timesheets at the moment, ahead of the Ferrari of Sainz and the Red Bull of Perez, it just doesn't compute. Something weird is going on. I just don't believe that they're going to be in that position in qualifying. I don't know whether it's the disruption from Vettel's crash that's delayed everybody. There's only 5 minutes to go. You would think the top teams will want to go out and do qualification simulations right now, basically. But we're not seeing it. So I don't know what's going on, but I wouldn't, if you're an Alpine or Alonso or McLaren or Norris fan, I wouldn't get too excited just yet.
Well, look, we've just seen Leclerc on an absolute qualifying run there. Soft tyres, low fuel, this is it. This is as good as he's got, and he's 1/10 off what Lando Norris has been able to achieve just moments earlier. So we are seeing cars now starting to really ramp things up. This is the last 4.5 minutes. And look, that pace from Lando Norris, they found something. It's genuine. Whether it's the conditions that have come to him or they found something with the car, that's got some genuine pace in it all of a sudden.
Mark, worth saying they are still a little way off the fastest time from free practice 2 yesterday. So Norris has set a 1:19.117. Yesterday's fastest from Leclerc was a 1:18.978.
Sorry, Jenny, we've got
the other Aston Martin.
The other Aston Martin,
the sole remaining one as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yellow
Can
flag.
I just, on this point, so Stroll's crash, we'll get a replay of it in a minute, and I will shut up, I promise. But the teams are saying, team radio.
I crashed.
You okay, Lance?
Yep.
Okay, car is safe, Lance. Car is safe.
Ouch. Aston Martin, Jenny. Goodness.
Yeah, just briefly to finish this point. So some of the cars delayed going out. Lance Stroll was one of them because they wanted to change the setup of the car. Because the DRS point was removed, that first DRS point was removed just 14 minutes before the start of the session. So some of the teams have made late changes to the cars. Others haven't made those changes, and they'll have to make them after this session. And I just wonder if that's coming into play for any of these teams, and if that's had any effect on Stroll, who has, dearie me, Aston Martin are just in a pickle now, aren't they?
They really are, Jenny. With the sound you're hearing is on board with Lance Stroll coming into the new turn 11 and just locks up his brakes across the gravel. The steering wheel is hard right, but that's not doing anything, and straight into the barrier. And well, much like Vettel, the front left is completely destroyed.
I was going to say, I hope they got a good stock of left front wishbones and push rods, because it's the same corner that's been destroyed on that car as on Sebastian's. And again, a really frustrating slow speed accident, really understeered off, and once he got into the gravel there was nothing he could do. It wasn't high speed, but he just had no way of stopping the car as soon as he hit the gravels, and off he was into the barriers. So I mean, what a weekend these guys are having. We talked earlier on about the team inside that garage having their work cut out. Well, now the other side of the garage are on the same sort of mission.
Red flag. Just over 2 minutes left to go in this session. Norris, Leclerc, Perez, Alonso and Sainz the top 5. Andrew Benson, you were a little bit harsh on Nicholas Latifi earlier because he's not a Formula 2 champion. He came runner-up in 2019 to Nick De Vries, who is a Formula E champion now. But that is the current situation at the moment. Cars coming back into the pit lane. I'll just give you a quick rundown. So the top 5 was Norris, Leclerc, Perez, Alonso, Sainz. Then it's Ricciardo, Verstappen, Hamilton, Bottas and Tsunoda. Russell, Gasly, Ocon, Schumacher, Zhou, Albon the top 16, Magnussen, Latifi and Stroll 19th. He won't be setting any more lap times. Vettel crashed out as well with his teammate. Yeah, not taking part 2, Jenny.
Yeah, painful session for Aston Martin then, finishing bottom of the timesheets, but
and
equally...
Lando, please bail, avoid full throttle. Blue B1, urgent, blue B1.
Oh dear. That was a message to Lando Norris asking him to put the car into a certain mode, and I'm guessing that's because they have picked up on an issue on the telemetry that's coming back, but we'll wait to hear from McLaren in a little bit more depth. They'll try not to tell us, we'll try and find out. Yeah, just on the timing of that crash for Stroll, it was not ideal for Verstappen. His race engineer, Jean-Pierre... Now I'm doubting myself. I always just call him GP Lambias. Said red flag, and Verstappen went, oh my God, man. And then he's 7th in the timing sheets at the moment, and he's just said, I just can't catch a break. So there's obviously frustration for Verstappen, and Mark, he did look uncomfortable in that car today compared to yesterday.
Yeah, he did. You could see the frustration, because every time he went for a lap, he either got traffic, he got the red flag, as you say, but also he had mistakes or issues of his own going on, where he'd have an understeer moment or even an oversteer moment earlier on in the session, and those things ruin your lap. You know, even if you don't manage to find your way into the gravel, they ruin your lap, and these laps ahead of qualifying are so critical to fine-tune the setup of your car, because next time you're out on circuit, it really matters.
Norris topping the timing sheet, but hearing a warning as he's coming into the pit lane. Would there be mixed emotions, Harry? I would imagine there's a little concern there if they're telling him to urgently do something to the car.
Naturally, I think they'll be buoyed by that, but again, it is only free practice, and I feel like I've got to dull down the hype train for both McLaren and Alpine, but especially off the back.
Have we not done that enough?
It's my first weekend, Jane. I've got to abide by the rules. But yeah, he will be. Hopefully, I'm sure he'll have faith in the mechanics and to sort that one out. But it will be playing in the back of their minds, because obviously Ricciardo retired with mechanical problems last time out, so reliability issues are creeping in for a number of teams.
Mark, can we decode the message at all? It was Lando, please bail, avoid full throttle, blue B1, urgent blue B1. Go.
It's difficult. B1 is one of the rotary switches on the steering wheel, so the B switch going to position 1, that's the mode that they want him to change, but you can configure that to mean anything you want, so I don't know what it means. Telling him to avoid full throttle would suggest that potentially something power unit related, they've seen an issue. I hope it's nothing serious, but it could be any range of things, but clearly enough to ask him to bail out of that moment.
Ferrari still looking impressive. Charles Leclerc 2nd in that session, Carlos Sainz 5th, and for the Red Bulls it was Perez in 3rd place and Verstappen in 7th. Is this going to be, a similar case, Harry, of seeing these two teams duking it out? Could be either of the drivers, if they just manage to hit that sweet spot, getting pole?
Absolutely. I think we've got a really good battle on our hands here. I think it's still too close to call. We saw Verstappen really pushing hard in the Red Bull, making mistakes, struggling with oversteer, then struggling with understeer. The Ferraris perhaps lacking a little bit more of that straight line speed compared to the Red Bulls. Marginal gains are having to be made here, and that's why you just cannot predict it right now.
And the Mercedes. Got to talk about them, I suppose. Hamilton P8, Russell P11. Hamilton almost 8/10 off the pace of Norris, who set the pace there. And the car looks horrible to drive, doesn't it?
It really does. It's just it's almost painful to watch, given that we've seen that car and that team dominate the sport for so long. We expect them to be at the front. We expect them to have delivered on the regulations in the almost perfect manner. We've seen them do that for so many years, and when they don't do it, it's a shock to us. But also internally in that team, they now have a different set of challenges in front of them. They're not just protecting their rear guard, they are trying to catch the guys in front, and that's a very different way of approaching how you go about your business. So it's going to be interesting to see how they face that challenge as the year progresses.
Bit disappointed with Argyle Jack, who's gone, yay, an extra 3 minutes of sleep. I don't think that's appropriate reaction. If you do want to get in touch, it's hashtag BBC F1. And now this is a pickle. So we've got Vettel, who crashed, and Stroll, who then went and crashed. How do you prioritise who you're going to do the work on first? Because I know you've got two different kind of teams within your team and they work on each car, but normally when some big incident happens in free practice 3, it's kind of all hands on deck to get the car sorted. You got Stroll, son of team owner, and Vettel, 4-time world champion Mark. No, who do you assist first?
It actually doesn't really work like that. They both have their own teams, as you say, and each of those teams perfectly capable of repairing those cars on their own, and only in the most extreme circumstances do the guys from one side of the garage end up moving over to assist on the other, because actually you tend to get in the way. Everyone has their own protocols, their own way of doing things.
I could just imagine that.
So it kind of does work like that. People stay to their own sides of the garage. They're very well rehearsed in doing these kind of repairs, so I've no doubt that bar any potential gearbox issue, and we didn't see how hard the rear end hit for Sebastian Vettel, if at all, but the Stroll one looks like a fairly simple repair and then set the car up again. Sebastian, a repair potentially with a bit more diagnostics to make sure nothing more serious has happened, but I'm sure they'll get there.
Oh, it's very, very tough. They're going to be right up against it. They need both cars back in the garage. They will probably not get their lunch break, I'm guessing now. No. A sandwich might get chucked at them, but they'll probably ignore it anyway. So the race is on for Aston Martin to get either of their cars into qualifying, which is going to happen in 2 hours' time, whether Aston Martin have one car, two cars, or no cars ready for it. Make sure you come back and join us. I'm just going to ask for a prediction very quickly. Mark, pole.
Charles Leclerc.
Harry?
Perez.
Ooh, okay. You're splitting your tactics. I like that. Okay, let us know who you think will be on pole and come back and join us, as I said, in a couple of hours' time. Thank you very much for getting up early. Hopefully it's not been too painful for you. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.